It was a chilly Sunday morning, November 16, 1992, in the small rural town of Greenwood. The morning fog had wrapped its silvery fingers tightly around the houses and trees, muffling sounds and blurring edges, as if Greenwood itself wished to remain hidden from the world. 8-year-old Tommy Dalton opened his eyes slowly, waking up to the gentle sounds of his mother, Catherine Dalton, busying herself downstairs in the kitchen. Tommy loved these peaceful mornings. There was always something soothing about the distant clinking of coffee mugs and the soft hum of the old radio tuned to the local country station. He rolled out of bed, feet sinking slightly into the worn carpet. The wooden floors beneath creaked familiarly as he moved toward the window, pulling back the curtain slightly to peer out. The street below was nearly deserted, the world outside still sleepy and unwilling to wake. Tommy smiled softly. Sundays always felt different, slower, gentler. Downstairs, Catherine was setting the table for breakfast, the air rich with the scent of scrambled eggs, toast, and freshly brewed coffee. Her husband, Robert, was already seated at the table, his attention fixed on the morning paper. "Tommy, breakfast," Catherine called, voice echoing warmly up the staircase. "Coming," Tommy shouted back, quickly dressing in his worn jeans and favorite green sweater. He bolted down the stairs, skipping steps 2 at a time. At the kitchen table, Robert Dalton smiled from behind his newspaper. "Morning, champ. Sleep well?" "Yep," Tommy nodded, grabbing a chair. "What's for breakfast?" Catherine placed a plate in front of him, ruffling his hair affectionately. "Your favorite. Eat up." They ate in comfortable silence, the clinking of cutlery mixing with the gentle background chatter of the radio host. Catherine glanced toward the bread box and frowned slightly. "Oh, we're out of bread," she said absent-mindedly. "I thought we still had some." Tommy perked up. "I can go get some from Mr. Dawson's store." "Please, Mom?" She hesitated briefly, glancing at Robert, who gave a reassuring nod. Greenwood was small and safe, after all. Kids often went alone to the corner store, it was just a short walk down the familiar path. "All right," Catherine finally agreed, handing Tommy a few crumpled dollar bills. "But come straight back. No stopping or playing around, got it?" "Promise," Tommy assured her enthusiastically, already heading for the door. "Coat," Robert reminded, smiling as Tommy raced back, snatched his jacket, and bolted outside. The screen door slapped shut behind him, the sound reverberating softly through the quiet morning air. Catherine watched from the window as Tommy's small figure disappeared around the bend. She couldn't know then that this ordinary Sunday morning would soon be etched permanently in her memory, darkened by confusion, heartbreak, and questions that would haunt her for decades. Chapter 2. The empty road. Tommy walked swiftly down the well-trodden dirt road. Mr. Dawson's corner store was only about half a mile away, nestled neatly between a small creek and the edge of a dense wooded area known locally as the Pines. The trees there stood tall and foreboding, whispering secrets to each other in the breeze. Tommy kicked stones along the path, humming softly. He passed the old wooden bridge over Silver Creek, the water beneath sparkling dimly through layers of morning mist. He glanced up at the trees lining the road, their bare branches reaching upward like skeletal fingers. A gentle shiver passed through him, though not from the cold. At last, he rounded the final bend. The familiar white and blue sign for Dawson's General Store came into view, slightly crooked but welcoming. Tommy pushed open the door, a small bell jingling merrily above his head. "Morning, Tommy." Mr. Dawson greeted cheerily from behind the counter, adjusting his thick glasses and folding up a newspaper. "Early errand today?" "Morning, Mr. Dawson," Tommy smiled brightly. "Just getting bread for Mom." "Well, lucky you." "Fresh batch today," Dawson replied, fetching a loaf from the shelf behind him. He rang it up quickly, handing the change back to Tommy. "See you tomorrow." Tommy waved cheerfully, stepping back outside. The door jingled once more as it swung shut behind him. Tommy paused for a moment, his eyes catching sight of something shiny on the ground near the store's entrance. He bent down curiously. It was a small silver key, slightly tarnished. He pocketed it thoughtfully, wondering if Mr. Dawson had dropped it. Shrugging, he decided he'd return it later. Tommy turned back onto the dirt road. He walked slower now, distracted, turning the cool metal key over in his fingers. He was so absorbed in his thoughts that he didn't notice the sound of footsteps crunching softly on the gravel path behind him, growing steadily closer. He did, however, suddenly sense an odd unease. Tommy paused, listening intently. The footsteps stopped abruptly, swallowed by the silence of the empty road. Heart quickening, he glanced back quickly. Nothing, just the empty road and the silent, watchful trees. He shook off the strange feeling, quickened his pace, and hurried on towards home. It was probably nothing, he assured himself, gripping the loaf of bread tighter. But Tommy Dalton would never make it home that morning. Just a short distance from his front porch, where his mother stood by the window anxiously checking the clock, Tommy disappeared, leaving behind only the loaf of bread, neatly placed in the middle of the deserted road, and a silence that echoed louder than any scream could. Chapter 3: Searching for Answers. Within hours of Tommy's disappearance, Greenwood was buzzing with anxious whispers. Neighbors gathered along the usually quiet streets, eyes filled with concern, uncertainty thickening the air. Sheriff Thomas Grant, a sturdy man in his late 50s, stood near his patrol car, his face taut with worry as he radioed for backup. "We have a missing child. Tommy Dalton, 8 years old, last seen heading home from Dawson's store," Grant relayed urgently, his voice steady despite the rising dread in his gut. Catherine stood near the porch, wrapped tightly in a wool blanket, pale and shivering, eyes wide with terror. Robert paced restlessly, occasionally running his fingers through his hair, murmuring words of assurance that convinced no one, least of all himself. Volunteers combed the surrounding fields and woods, flashlights piercing the gathering dusk. But the fading daylight yielded no clues. Not a trace. Only the abandoned loaf of bread sitting hauntingly in the road, now marked off by yellow police tape, illuminated by the cold, harsh beams of headlights. As darkness settled over Greenwood, whispers intensified, unspoken fears given voice in hushed tones. Had someone taken him? Had Tommy simply wandered off? But the town's deepest fear remained unnamed. Greenwood was no stranger to odd happenings. Over the years, stories of strange noises from the pines or fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures near Silver Creek had become commonplace, though most brushed them aside as superstition. Sheriff Grant dismissed none of it. He knew better than anyone that small towns held secrets beneath their tranquil surfaces. He gathered his deputies, assigning patrols and searches throughout the night, determined to find Tommy before dawn broke. But dawn arrived cold and unmerciful, and Tommy Dalton remained missing. Chapter 4: Echoes from the Past. Weeks turned into months, each day blending painfully into the next. The Daltons' home, once warm and filled with laughter, grew silent and withdrawn. Catherine rarely spoke, her once vibrant eyes now clouded with grief. Robert spent most days roaming Greenwood streets, searching hopelessly, unwilling to accept reality. Sheriff Grant tirelessly pursued every lead, however faint or unlikely. But Greenwood's secrets remained stubbornly hidden. Until, one cold winter day, nearly 30 years later, a small group of teenagers, exploring the outskirts of the Pines, stumbled upon something that would reignite the town's buried fears. Near the twisted roots of an old oak tree, a boy named Ryan Carter noticed something strange carved deeply into the bark. Brushing aside moss and dirt, he revealed a simple yet haunting inscription. "Tommy Dalton was here. Help me." Ryan felt chills ripple through him as he stared at the words. He recognized the name immediately. Everyone in Greenwood knew the story of Tommy Dalton. Panic surged, mixed with excitement and fear. How long had it been there? Who carved it? Was it truly Tommy? Within hours, Sheriff Grant, now nearing retirement, stood once again before the haunting evidence of Tommy's disappearance. He reached out to touch the carving gently, as if it might vanish beneath his fingertips. Emotions he'd buried long ago resurfaced powerfully. Had Tommy been alive, trapped nearby for all these years? Or was this the work of someone cruelly playing on old wounds? The inscription brought no answers, only deeper, darker questions. Grant knew the investigation was far from over. He turned, facing the pines, their dark branches whispering secrets that begged to be uncovered. Chapter 5: Shadows in the Pines. The discovery of the carving reignited the investigation. A fresh wave of police, volunteers, and curious townsfolk converged on the area, combing through the pines with renewed determination. Sheriff Grant coordinated the search, aware of every rustle, snap, and shadow beneath the dense canopy of trees. Days passed with no new evidence, frustration growing among search teams. Late one afternoon, Deputy Sarah Powell, new to Greenwood and eager to prove herself, wandered deeper into the woods than anyone else dared. Her flashlight beam danced nervously between trees as shadows lengthened ominously. Suddenly, she stumbled over something hidden beneath layers of leaves. Catching her balance, she turned her flashlight downward and froze. Partially concealed beneath decaying foliage was an old sneaker, small, child-sized, worn and faded with time. Heart pounding, Sarah knelt carefully, clearing away debris. Her breath caught sharply as she recognized faded initials written on the sole, TD. A shiver passed through her, an eerie sense that she was not alone gripping her tightly. Slowly, she turned, sensing eyes upon her from the shadows. But the forest revealed nothing, just silence thick with secrets. Suddenly, her radio crackled sharply, jolting her from her trance. "Deputy Powell, what's your location?" Taking a shaky breath, she answered quickly, "Deep in the pines, near the old quarry trail." "I've found something." "Hold position." "We're coming," Grant's voice responded, tense but reassuring. Sarah stood, flashlight trembling slightly, waiting in the oppressive silence as shadows danced closer around her, carrying with them whispered promises of hidden truths. Chapter 6: Whispers in the Dark. Sheriff Grant arrived swiftly, his breath visible in the crisp air, flashlight cutting sharp lines through the twilight gloom. Behind him, several deputies spread out carefully, marking the scene methodically, their movements deliberate and respectful of the silent forest around them. Grant knelt beside Sarah, examining the sneaker with a grave expression. He handled it cautiously, mindful of preserving evidence, the initials TD triggering a heavy ache in his chest. A long, slow sigh escaped him. "This could change everything," he muttered softly, glancing at Sarah. "Good work, Deputy." Sarah nodded, struggling to keep her composure, eyes fixed anxiously on the sheriff's lined face. "What now?" Grant straightened, scanning the woods thoughtfully. "We expand the perimeter. I want every inch searched. Tommy might have left more behind, something else we missed." As the search expanded, darkness swallowed the pines entirely. Lanterns and flashlight beams danced erratically through the trees, casting elongated shadows that stretched and twisted menacingly, seemingly mocking their efforts. Sarah lingered near the sneaker, unable to shake the sense of unease. Every rustle of leaves, every distant whisper of wind made her heart skip a beat. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, not just by curious townsfolk or fellow deputies, but by something else entirely. She turned her attention to a small pathway that dipped deeper into the woods, barely visible, narrow and winding. Her flashlight flickered slightly, casting uncertain beams ahead. A strange impulse tugged at her, curiosity mixed with an inexplicable dread. Without thinking, Sarah took a cautious step forward, then another, following the path deeper into darkness. The forest seemed to close behind her, muffling the distant voices of her colleagues. Her radio crackled faintly, but she barely noticed, drawn onward by an irresistible pull. Minutes later, she halted abruptly. Before her, partially obscured by gnarled branches, stood a dilapidated shack, weathered and barely standing, as if the woods themselves had tried reclaiming it. The structure exuded an air of abandonment and decay, Yet Sarah's instinct screamed that this place was significant. Slowly, pulse hammering in her ears, Sarah pushed the heavy door open. It groaned on rusted hinges, revealing a dimly lit interior, dust motes swirling lazily in the beam of her flashlight. She stepped cautiously inside, her flashlight scanning the room methodically. At first glance, nothing stood out: broken furniture, mold-covered walls, and faded remnants of what might have once been curtains. Then, abruptly, her beam caught something in the far corner: papers, scattered and partially hidden beneath a rotted mattress. Kneeling swiftly, Sarah carefully shifted the moldy fabric aside. Her heart raced as she uncovered an old journal, its cover worn and faded. Hands trembling slightly, she opened it to the first page. In childish handwriting, unmistakably careful, were words that made her breath catch sharply. "My name is Tommy Dalton. I'm scared. I don't think I'm alone here." Sarah felt icy chills ripple down her spine, eyes darting nervously toward the open door, suddenly acutely aware of how isolated she was. Her breath quickened as the wind howled softly outside, whispering secrets she was not sure she wanted to hear. Chapter 7: The Journal. Sarah's fingers hovered over the fragile, yellowed pages, torn between the instinct to preserve evidence and the overwhelming need to read more, to know. She flipped carefully to the next entry. "They bring food sometimes. I don't know who they are. I can't see their faces. They whisper at night." Her throat tightened. The handwriting shifted, growing more frantic as the pages continued, the spacing erratic, the ink smudged as if written in trembling hands or tears. There were drawings, too, crude sketches of the forest, the shack, and strange, dark figures with hollow eyes, always drawn at a distance. Sarah's flashlight dimmed suddenly. She paused. The beam flickered, stuttered, then steadied. She let out a slow breath, but her heart kept pounding. "I tried to leave once. The trees moved. I swear they did. The path didn't take me home. It just kept going. I heard someone call my name from behind, but it wasn't my mom. It sounded like her, but it wasn't." Sarah swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed to get out, to call for backup. But she kept turning pages. "One of them talks to me now. Says he used to live in town. He says Greenwood has forgotten him too. He says they all do eventually. And finally, if someone finds this, please tell them I tried. I tried so hard. But I think I'm becoming like them. I can feel it." Suddenly, the radio on her shoulder hissed and crackled. "Ra? Deputy Powell, do you copy?" She fumbled for the mic, pressed the button. "Powell here. I found something. I'm in an old shack northeast of the quarry trail. There's a journal. It's his." A pause. Then Grant's voice, calm but strained: "Stay put. We're coming to you. Don't touch anything else." She stared at the journal lying open before her. Her flashlight flickered again, then died. Complete darkness. Her breath hitched. The silence in the shack thickened. Then, footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Just outside the doorway. Sarah held her breath. Another step. Then a low, raspy whisper from the darkness beyond the door. "Tommy?" Chapter 8: What Walks in the Pines. The whisper echoed like a gust of wind down a hollow pipe, dry, thin, almost inhuman. Sarah's pulse pounded so violently she felt dizzy. She stood frozen, unable to speak, the journal still cradled in her hands like a relic from another world. Silence. Then another footstep on the leaves outside. She reached slowly, quietly, for the flashlight, tapped it once, twice. Nothing. The darkness felt alive, pressing against her like thick cloth. "Who's there?" she managed, her voice cracking. No answer. Instead, the door creaked slowly open a few inches more. Cold air slid in, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and old rot. "Sheriff," she tried. "Is that you?" A faint shuffling sound answered. She drew her service weapon, arms stiff, heart galloping. "Identify yourself." But again, only silence. Her radio crackled faintly again, the voice distant now, full of static. "Ra, come in your hold." Then nothing. She backed up a step. Then another. Her foot bumped against the broken bed frame, the journal slipping from her grip and landing softly on the floorboards. A page flipped on its own. Just then, movement. A silhouette shifted past the doorway, too quickly to fully see. Thin. Bent slightly forward. Not running. Just gliding. Then it stopped. Sarah held her breath, gun trembling. From the dark outside came another whisper. This one clearer. Closer. Childlike. "He's not gone." It was followed by a soft, breathy laugh. Then the sound of something crawling, dry leaves crackling under long, slow drags. And then, nothing. The wood swallowed all sound again. Sarah didn't move for a long moment, frozen. Her skin crawled. Her thoughts raced, trying to rationalize. Maybe it was a drifter, maybe she was exhausted, maybe the journal had her mind twisted in fear. Finally, she stepped to the doorway and raised her dead flashlight like a weapon. Her eyes scanned the tree line. Nothing. The forest was still. She radioed again, voice tight, hushed. "This is Powell. I need immediate backup to my location. Someone, or something, is out here. And it's not friendly." Chapter 9, The Name Beneath the Bark. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, voices called through the woods, familiar, human voices. Flashlights broke through the trees like tiny searchlights, and Sarah nearly collapsed with relief when she saw Sheriff Grant leading the group. She emerged from the shack pale, shaking, but with her weapon still drawn. "What happened?" Grant asked, gripping her shoulder, steadying her. "There was someone here," she said. "I didn't see them. But they spoke. They whispered my name. I'm sure they were watching. Maybe more than one." Grant exchanged a grim look with Deputy Marcus, then motioned the others toward the shack. "I found this," Sarah added, pointing to the journal on the floor inside. It's his. Tommy's. The handwriting. It's a kid's. It describes being held here. For years, maybe longer." Grant picked it up carefully, flipping through the pages. His jaw tightened as he read a few lines. "Damn," he muttered. "We'll get it tested, but this feels real." The search expanded again. Over the next few days, cadaver dogs were brought in. Drones scanned the woods from above. Every square meter was scoured. Then, 2 days later, another discovery was made. A second tree. This one older, deeper in the pines. The bark had grown thick around it, but when a fallen branch tore away a patch, someone spotted lettering beneath the exposed wood. Carved deep, almost desperate. It took a team nearly an hour to fully strip the moss and outer bark away. The words were jagged. Carved over and over, as if whoever wrote them did so in obsession, or madness. "I'm still here." Beneath that, smaller. "Don't trust him." The message struck a nerve. But more unsettling than the words themselves was what they were carved into. Embedded near the base of the tree, visible once the bark was stripped back, was what looked unmistakably like the handle of a knife, wooden, almost fossilized in place by decades of growth. Grant stared at it in silence. One of the deputies, younger, nervous, broke the silence. "Sheriff, who do you think him is?" Grant didn't answer right away. But his eyes drifted toward the eastern edge of the pines, toward a cabin that hadn't been occupied for over 25 years. A cabin that once belonged to Richard Holloway. A man who, in 1993, just months after Tommy vanished, had left town quietly. No forwarding address. No trace. No suspicion, just another forgotten name. Until now. Chapter 10, The Holloway Cabin. Richard Holloway had always been an enigma in Greenwood. He arrived in the late 70s, bought a small plot of land near the Eastern Pines, and built his cabin himself. Tall, quiet, and polite in a formal sort of way, he rarely interacted with the townsfolk beyond a nod or brief chat at the general store. He had no family, no visitors, and no known job. Some said he was a writer. Others said he had money from somewhere, perhaps inheritance, perhaps something less clean. But since he kept to himself and caused no trouble, no one questioned it. Not seriously. Until now. Sheriff Grant hadn't thought about Holloway in years. He remembered interviewing him briefly in '92, in the early weeks of Tommy's disappearance, when the entire town had been turned upside down. Holloway had answered every question politely, even invited Grant into his cabin. There had been nothing suspicious, no signs of a struggle, no signs of a child ever having been there. But it had always bothered Grant, somewhere deep in the pit of his gut, how calm the man had been. Unnaturally calm. Like he was reading from a script. And then, a year later, he vanished. No note. No sale of the property. Just gone. The land had been sitting there, untouched and overgrown ever since, too far out for anyone to bother tearing it down. But now, standing at the edge of the tree line, Grant looked up at the cabin. It hadn't aged well. The wooden steps sagged. The porch had half collapsed. The front door hung crookedly on its hinges. The air around it was stale, heavy, like something had been waiting inside for a long time, something patient. "Let's go in quiet," Grant said to his team. Guns down. Flashlights on. They moved in slowly, boots crunching on old leaves, breath visible in the cold air. The front room was full of dust and silence. Shelves lined with books, untouched. Furniture draped in mildew-covered sheets. A desk sat by the window, old paper scattered across it. Grant lifted one gently, blank pages, all brittle. As if someone had tried to write, and never could. Then Deputy Marcus called out from the back room. "Sheriff, you need to see this." Grant stepped into what had once been a bedroom. One wall had been stripped of plaster, exposing raw wood beneath, and across the wooden slats, hundreds of small carvings. Names. Dates. Phrases. Some were barely legible, scratched by what must have been a knife or nail. And among them, over and over again. Tommy Dalton. "Help me. Can't get out. He watches. It's not him anymore." The trees remember. A chill ran down Grant's spine. And in the far corner of the room, behind a leaning wardrobe, was a trapdoor. Almost invisible in the floorboards. Someone had clearly tried to conceal it, but not well enough. Grant crouched and lifted it open. The hinges groaned like something waking from sleep. A ladder descended into darkness. He clicked on his flashlight. The light revealed a small cellar. Dirt walls. Damp air. And in the far corner, something that made Grant freeze. A child's bed frame. Rusting. Small. Still intact. Blankets, old, filthy, but unmistakably patterned with faded cartoon characters. A small tin box sat beside it. Grant descended, careful and slow, every instinct flaring. He reached the box and opened it. Inside were folded pages. More of the journal. He unfolded the top one. "He comes through the wall sometimes. I don't know how. I hear him walking above me, but when I scream, nobody comes. I stop screaming. I write instead." Then another. "He calls himself Richard now, but I don't think he remembers being anything else. I think the woods took him too. And on the back of that same page, written shakily. Don't stay after dark. Don't listen when the trees speak your name. That's when they know you hear them. That's when they start to follow. Grant stood slowly. Above him, the floor creaked. Footsteps. Not his deputies. Someone else was inside the house. Chapter 11, The Man Upstairs. Grant froze at the base of the cellar ladder, the journal page still clenched in his fist. Above him, footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Not the purposeful tread of a deputy in boots. These were dragging. Uneven. Each step seemed to scrape across the warped floorboards. He held his breath, raising his flashlight toward the opening. He wanted to call out, but something in the air, thick, wrong, held his voice in his throat. Then, silence. Not the kind of silence that followed someone walking away. The kind that settled in when something was watching. Grant drew his weapon, the flashlight beam shaking slightly as he climbed, rung by creaking rung, back into the bedroom. Empty. The room looked unchanged. The wardrobe. The scrawled wall. The yellowed light streaming in through the cracked window. But the air had shifted. He felt it. Then, movement. From the hallway, a shadow. Just the edge of one. Not fully formed, not quite real. He spun toward it, flashlight slicing through the space. Nothing there. Behind him, Marcus called, "Sheriff, you all right?" Grant turned. Marcus stood in the doorway, breathing hard, hand on his sidearm. "I saw something," Grant said low. "Someone." "Back exits untouched." "Nobody left," Marcus replied, eyes narrowing. "Are you sure?" A loud crack cut him off. Wood splitting. From under the house. They both moved fast, weapons raised, back toward the cellar. The trapdoor was still open. They aimed down, but saw nothing. Then something new. A sound, soft, subtle, impossible. A child humming. It came not from the cellar, but from inside the walls. Thin, fragile. A lullaby. Familiar. It was Tommy's lullaby. Catherine used to sing it in church. Grant had heard her hum it while folding bulletins. Marcus looked at him. "That's not possible." Grant didn't respond. He followed the sound, through the bedroom, down the hall, to the den. The humming faded there. But something else remained. An old photograph. It lay face down on the mantel. He picked it up. It was a class picture, the kind they used to take in the 80s, sun-faded, edges curled. 20 kids. All smiling. One of them, Tommy Dalton. But someone had scratched a deep X through his face. And on the back, in black ink, smeared and shaky, "Only 19 made it home." Chapter 12, What the Trees Remember. Sheriff Grant didn't sleep that night. Back at the station, he locked himself in his office with the journal pages spread across his desk. The flickering fluorescent lights above gave everything a washed-out, ghostly look, as if time had stuttered. Outside the window, the street was empty, quiet. Too quiet. He poured coffee into a chipped mug and read the entries again and again, looking for patterns, codes, anything to hold on to. But the more he read, the worse it became. The words weren't just the frightened scribbles of a child. They had structure. There was clarity, logic. Desperation didn't make you precise. But these pages were. Tommy had tracked time. Scratch marks, moon phases, things said in whispers at night. He'd heard people walking above him, and not just one person. Many. Sometimes he named them, the thin man, the crawling one, Richard, but different. They weren't names of people. They were roles. Grant circled each one with a red pen. At 4:13 a.m., he finally stood, walked to the evidence locker, and retrieved something he hadn't touched in 25 years, the original case file of Tommy Dalton. He opened the brown folder. Inside, the original police report. Statements. Witness maps. Photos. The loaf of bread lying in the middle of the road. Tommy's school picture, smiling in a striped sweater. Then something caught his eye. A name. Buried in one of the older witness interviews. Ellis Marlowe. That name hadn't come up in decades. He'd been a janitor at the elementary school. Fired quietly for behavioral issues. Never charged, never publicly accused, but the whispers had been loud. Grant rubbed his forehead. He remembered questioning Ellis himself. The man had been jittery. Nervous. But helpful. Said he'd seen Tommy hanging around the back of the school sometimes, watching the woods. He listened too much, Ellis had said. The trees talk, you know. But not to everyone. Back then, Grant had dismissed it as nonsense. But now. He did a background check. Ellis Marlowe had moved out of state 2 years after the incident. No forwarding address. But there had been one transaction filed under his name 10 years ago, a purchase at a pawn shop. The item? A silver key. Grant froze. A key had been found near Dawson's store on the day Tommy disappeared. That key was never logged into evidence. A rush of sickness hit him. Who had taken it? Who had decided it didn't matter? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Deputy Sarah Powell, pale and wide-eyed. "Sheriff," she said, voice tight. "You need to come with me. Now." They drove in silence to Catherine Dalton's house. She had called the station shortly after 5 a.m. She hadn't called in years. As they arrived, they saw Catherine waiting on the porch in a robe, hair unkempt, hands trembling. "I heard him," she said. Grant approached cautiously. "Heard who, Catherine?" "My son," she whispered. "Tommy. I heard his voice in the walls." Grant opened his mouth to speak, but she held up a shaking hand. "I've heard sounds before. Pipes. Animals. But this was his voice." "I know it," he said, "Mama. I remember now." Sarah glanced at Grant, visibly shaken. They went inside. The house was clean but dim, the shades still drawn. Catherine led them to the back wall of the kitchen. "It came from here," she said. "Then I heard something fall behind the wall. Like paper." Grant, heart pounding, gestured to Sarah. They fetched tools and carefully removed a portion of the drywall. Inside was a dark hollow, dusty, lined with old insulation. And resting in that space, untouched by time, was an envelope. Yellowed. Fragile. Addressed in a child's handwriting. "To Mama. If I forget, please remember for me." Inside were 3 folded pages. The first was a drawing. A crude one, stick figures. One larger, looming. Another, smaller, behind bars. Red crayon scribbled everywhere. The second page was more of the journal. "There's a room under the room. I don't go there. Richard says it's where they teach you to forget. I don't want to forget anymore." The final page said only, "It watches from under the roots." Catherine collapsed into a chair, silent tears running down her face. Grant stood still, his fingers curling tightly around the edges of the paper. The phrase echoed in his mind like a warning bell. It watches from under the roots. Outside, dawn was breaking. But in the pines, the shadows didn't move. They waited. Chapter 13, Beneath the Town. The next few days in Greenwood passed like a dream on the edge of a nightmare. Sheriff Grant stopped sleeping. He barely spoke. The walls of his office became a collage: maps, photographs, handwriting samples, faded reports. Red yarn stretched between pins like veins. He read everything twice, then backwards, then out loud. He listened to the recordings from 1992. Rewatched the only known footage of Tommy, from a school play. He even found a tape of Richard Holloway's voice, archived from a town hall meeting on zoning laws. He played that tape over and over. Not because of what Holloway said, but because of the silence that followed. Grant swore, he could hear breathing in the background. Not on the mic. In the room. And sometimes, whispering. Not words. Just sound, like dry leaves scraping together behind your skull. He told no one. Instead, he turned to Greenwood itself. The history of the town didn't start with railroads or logging, like the tourist brochures said. It started with Cedar Root, a settlement that predated Greenwood by nearly a century, located, of course, where the Pines now stood. Few records existed, but what he found was unsettling. The settlers had vanished. Every last one. One surviving journal mentioned the hollow place, a grove where sound dies and roots listen. There were notes of rituals. Circles of stones. A tree that grew wrong. And then, silence. No records after 1842. It was as if something had eaten the town whole, leaving behind only woods and a strange echo in the soil. That same year, settlers re-established the town about a mile west. Greenwood was born. The name change had been intentional. As if distance, and a new name, could keep whatever had happened there from following. But it had followed. Grant stared at a town map from 1903. He noticed something. The original boundary of Cedar Root lined up exactly with the current eastern edge of the Pines. And the Holloway cabin stood dead center in what had once been called the Silent Mile. His hand trembled as he drew a circle. And then, he remembered something. A boy. Not Tommy. Another child, from 1971. The case hadn't been labeled as missing. It had been closed. Ben Parker, age 9. Found wandering the Pines. No memory of how he got there. Couldn't even say who he was for several days. When he did, he described living with a man who had no eyes, but saw everything. His case file included psychiatric evaluations. Drawings. One image stood out, a tree with faces in the bark. A hole at the bottom like a yawning mouth. Children in cages drawn in red crayon. The psychologist had dismissed it as trauma-induced hallucination. Parker was institutionalized until adulthood. He lived under a new name now. Grant stood abruptly, grabbed his keys, and drove. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. 2 hours later, outside Greenwood. The facility was small. Remote. Clean. A nurse brought Grant to a recreation room where Benjamin Parker, now in his 60s, sat quietly staring at a jigsaw puzzle he hadn't touched in days. He looked up slowly as Grant entered. "I know why you're here," he said, voice brittle. Grant hesitated. "You do?" Ben nodded. "He's awake again, isn't he?" "Who?" "You know his name already." "But it isn't his." "It's the name they gave him." Ben smiled slightly. He wore Richard like a coat. But he was never just a man. The hollow man finds a shell. He becomes you. And then, you don't get to leave the woods. Grant felt the cold rise in him. Ben leaned closer. "You saw the tree, didn't you?" Grant nodded slowly. Ben's eyes darkened. "They always mark it. The gate. The roots go down deeper than you think. The boy's still there, Sheriff. But he's not whole anymore. If you go looking for him." He paused, then whispered. "Don't listen if he starts to sing. That night, back in Greenwood, a 911 call came from a trailer park near the eastern edge of town. A woman had found her son sleepwalking into the woods. She stopped him just in time. He said he was following a voice. He said Tommy was calling his name. And that he'd come back different this time. Chapter 14, Where the Roots Breathe. It was just past 3 a.m. when Sheriff Grant parked his truck at the tree line. He didn't wait for backup. Not this time. He wore body armor beneath his coat, carried a sidearm, 2 flashlights, a flare, and Tommy Dalton's journal, now sealed in a plastic bag and taped to his chest, like a talisman. His boots crunched on the frost-hardened ground as he moved into the pines for what he knew might be the last time. He followed no trail. The forest guided him. Every path curved toward one place. The wind picked up, though the trees didn't sway. They only whispered now, softly, a rising pulse of sound in the branches, not unlike breathing. Grant found it near dawn. A clearing. Perfectly circular. Dead silent. At its center, the tree. Wider than a truck. Bark blackened, roots like claws frozen mid-crawl. The air stank faintly of copper and rot. Strange markings, carvings and concentric rings, covered its trunk. Some old, some fresh. One marking, near the base, had been carved deeper than the rest. A door. Not a literal one, but as he stepped closer, flashlight shaking, the bark seemed to pulse, then shift. And there it was. An opening. A hollow. Just tall enough to crawl through. He knelt. Inside, the air was warm. Too warm. It smelled like breath and damp stone. He crawled in. Chapter 15, The Hollow Place. Inside the tree, the passage sloped downward, deeper than any root system should go. His flashlight illuminated walls of living wood, pulsing gently like muscle. The silence was total. Not even his own breathing seemed to echo. Until he reached the chamber. It opened like a wound, round, earthen, domed. At its center was a pool of black water, perfectly still. Around it, remains. Toys. Bones. Drawings. A shoe with TD scratched on the side. And across the chamber, against the far wall, a figure sat. Small. Thin. A boy. His back to Grant. Still. Motionless. Tommy? Grant called softly. The boy's head twitched. Turned slightly. Not fully. Then he spoke. A whisper. But the voice was wrong. Too old. Too echoed. Why did you leave me? Grant stepped forward slowly. Tommy, it's me. Sheriff Grant. You remember me? The boy stood. The shadows peeled back from his face. And Grant's heart froze. Because it was Tommy. But not the way he remembered him. His face was aged in the wrong places. Like time had moved sideways. His eyes were dark, not angry, not afraid. Just empty. I waited, Tommy said. I became the voice. I watched them come and go. I listened to the roots. They taught me how to stay. Tommy, we can go. Your mom's alive. We can help you. Please. Tommy tilted his head. You still think this is a rescue, he said. Then the whispering began again, but not from Tommy. From the walls. From the water. And from behind Grant, where the passage had vanished. Shapes moved in the dark. Thin, long-limbed. Faces like stretched bark, mouths open in silent scream. Not ghosts. Not quite human. Things that had worn people like coats. Things that had learned language by listening. Tommy stepped backward, toward the wall. It doesn't matter now, he whispered. I'm not what I was. And neither are you. Then he smiled, an empty, almost kind expression. Run. The roots snapped to life. Chapter 16, Greenwood, 10 days later. Sheriff Thomas Grant was found unconscious just beyond the pines. No wounds. No trauma. Just lying in the frost, eyes open. He didn't speak for 3 days. When he finally did, he asked only one question. Did you hear him singing? He was retired quietly. No charges. No press. The department claimed a health issue. The town accepted the story. Just like they always had. But some things changed. The pines were marked off by new fences. Trespassing became strictly enforced. Catherine Dalton received a letter in the mail a week later. No return address. Inside, a photo. Old. Blurry. Of a child's face. And on the back, written in pencil. Thank you for waiting. That night, Catherine sat by the window, watching the trees. She didn't sleep. But she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Epilogue, the roots still listen. Sometimes, after the rain, children in Greenwood say they hear someone humming in the distance. Always the same tune. A lullaby, almost forgotten. And when they go quiet, really quiet, they say the trees breathe with them. No one speaks of Tommy Dalton anymore. But the forest remembers. And the roots? The roots still whisper. Waiting for someone to listen.